Hi there. Okay, we're going to continue our study in the book of Judges. This is session 16, and we are going to be looking at chapter 11. And we're getting down there. We have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I think. We have 6 chapters left, counting this one. So we're basically now getting to meet Jephthah, the next judge. But because we had the little prologue in the last lesson, I want to go back and read a couple of the verses from chapter 10 to bring us to this point in chapter 11. Because it's kind of like if we just start dry, we might forget something. So we're going to start with chapter 10, verses 7 and 8, and then 17. So chapter 10, 7 and 8, and 17. God became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites, who that year shattered and crushed them. For 18 years they oppressed all the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim, and Israel was in great distress. I'm going to stop there. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then 17. When the Ammonites were called to arms and camped in Gilead, the Israelites assembled and camped in Mizpah. Okay, so this is the situation. For 18 years, the Ammonites and the Philistines have been encroaching on and causing havoc for the Israelites. They oppressed the Israelites. And so I wanted to go back to one of these, our first maps. Here we see Ammon, the land of the Ammonites would be right around here. And Philistia, the land where the Philistines are, even though it's not supposed to be their land. They are very powerful, and they've basically encamped there, and no one can budge them, because that's kind of Judah's land, and maybe a little bit of Dan, but definitely Judah. A little bit of Dan, maybe a tiny bit of Ephraim, but yeah, okay. So this is the situation. Israel has begged God. God first said no, then he says, okay, I will help you. And when they absolutely show total remorse. And so now the Ammonites can tell that the Israelites are starting to get a little sure of trying to free themselves from the oppression of the Ammonites. And so they come into the region called Gilead. And the map I have, one of the maps I have here, this is a map of who lived where before the Israelites came into the promised land. And so this is the area called Gilead, right here. See, this region called Gilead. And you can see a little bit closer, okay? So the Ammonites have come into the Gilead region. Now, I, several weeks ago, had taken this map of who lived where and who reigned where before the Israelites came, and then I superimposed all the different tribe lands of Israel. Now, I will tell, I just surprised myself. I was looking at this map because it's not marked with what tribe has which section, but I, through the study of Judges, can now pinpoint without the names which region belongs to which tribe. And the ones on the east side of the Jordan here are Reuben, Gad, and East Manasseh. So these are the ones on the east side of the Jordan. The Ammonites came here, but then they crossed the Jordan and they bothered Judah, which is all of this here. Keep out Simeon here, but Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. And this one is supposed to be Dan, but remember how Dan was really weak and not really didn't take over their own land. So apparently between the Philistines coming this way and the Ammonites coming this way, this region was bugged by, especially this area right here, bugged by Ammonites, and this area here was bugged by Ammonites very strongly. So here we are. The Israelites have camped out in Mizpah, and there are actually, I actually have that. There's a Mizpah in Gilead, not to be confused with the Mizpah around the border of Benjamin and Ephraim. But there's a Mizpah here, and we'll talk a little bit more about Mizpah when we get to that part in chapter 11. So that's a setup. So let's go into chapter 11 because there's enough to read in it. So chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. Jephthah the Gileadite, wow, from Gilead, was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His father's name was actually Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, the father, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. You are not going to get any inheritance in our family, they said, because you are the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a group of adventurers gathered around him and followed him. Okay, no one knows where Tob is or was. Some people think it was like on the outskirts of the Ammonite or Amorite kingdoms. Some think it was near the southeast portion of Galilee, but we don't know for sure. There's a lot of conjecture. So, but he left and he went far away and started creating his own story. Most commentaries believe that the group of adventurers are not like a mercenary army or something, but rather other people who are, don't have a means of livelihood and that they recognized in him a strong leader and warrior, and together they probably caused havoc on non-Israelite travelers. Let's just say that. They were kind of, the highway robbers of their day, and that's how they survived. Also, it could be that they sold their expertise to protect cities or areas from outsiders, which is actually what future King David did with when he was hiding from Saul. He and his men would protect a certain area, certain city, and would be recompensed for doing that. So Jephthah is out there on his own, building a life far from the rest of his half brothers, and things are just kind of like going on with that. In the meantime, we have the problems going on in Israel. So verses 4 through 9. Sometime later, years later, it might have been even those 18 years that the Ammonites were bothering everything, and Jephthah wasn't around he was away. Sometime later, when the Ammonites made war on Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. "Come," they said, "be our commander so that we can fight the Ammonites." And Jephthah said to them, excuse me, "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" He's doing okay, but you're in trouble. The elders of Gilead said to him, "Nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be our head over all who live in Gilead." That whole region. We're talking Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh east. Jephthah answered, "Suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head?" Let me stop there for a second. So he's obviously got this reputation now. People know it. They knew who to go looking for. If they need a leader to fight the Ammonites, they've heard about the prowess, the warrior Jephthah. And they're like, "Hey, we will make you our judge. You will be our leader if you help us do this." And he's here like, "Yeah, I could go do that." And then you turn around and say, "Oh, well, we didn't actually mean it." But they're here like, no. It's like, so, that's where verses 10 and 11 come in. The elders of Gilead replied, "The Lord is our witness. We will certainly do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And he repeated all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. Now, I want to mention something now about Mizpah. The word itself means watchtower. Basically watching, a place of watching, a watchtower. And when the history of Mizpah is when two people make an arrangement, they make a contract between each other. It's kind of like they do it at Mizpah because it's as if God is watching, and so it makes it legal. It's more real because they've done this, and so he repeats his words at Mizpah. It's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then you're going to stick to your side, and so this is it. And again, like I showed you, Mizpah is around here in the part that's the region called Gilead, which is, we'll look at it a little bit closer on other maps. So anyway, okay, we've done this. But Jephthah actually, it starts off, he's quite, he's not looking for a fight. Let's say it that way. Aggie? He's not looking for a fight. So verses 12 and 13 show us that he's trying not to. Aggie, no. Sorry, she's trying to dig up her bed, and she digs up pieces of it that I have to clean up. Anyway, verses 12 and 13. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the Ammonite king with the question, "What do you have against us that you have attacked our country?" And the king of the Ammonites answered Jephthah's messengers, "When Israel came out of Egypt, they took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, all the way to the Jordan. Now give it back peaceably." Okay, so Jephthah sends a messenger saying, "Why are you attacking us? We haven't provoked you for any of this. Why are you doing this to us?" And the king of the Ammonites says, "Well, Israel took our land. When you came out of Egypt, you took our land and we want it back. So give it back to us peaceably and we'll go on our way." Okay, well, at this point, Jephthah writes a letter. This is a little history lesson that he is writing about. And we're going to read it in a couple different sections. So we'll start off with verses 14 through 20. Okay? You got this. And if you actually want to look up the actual event, you'll want to be looking at the Numbers chapter 21 and Deuteronomy chapter 1. Both talk about this event. Okay? Numbers 21, Deuteronomy 1. Verse 14. Jephthah sent back messengers to the Ammonite king, saying, this is what Jephthah says. Israel did not take the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites, but when they came out of Egypt, Israel went through the desert to the Red Sea and on to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, give us permission to go through your country. But the king of Edom would not listen. They sent also to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. Next, they traveled through the desert, skirting the lands of Edom and Moab, passed along the eastern side of the country of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was its border. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon, and said to him, let us pass through your country to our own place. Sihon, however, did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So he mustered all his men and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Okay, so actually I'll start with this. We'll go back to the time before the Canaanites losing their land because God was giving the promised land to the Israelites. Basically, whatever you see as Canaan, and actually in Philistia and part of Phoenicia, there was the original promised land. Okay, so they skirted Edom. There's Kadesh. They skirted Edom. They skirted Moab, and they got to the northern, above the Arnon River, and sent a messenger to Sihon in Hebron, which was his capital. Sihon was an Amorite, okay? And they said that, and rather than allow them to go in, even just saying, no, you can't, and they would have had to skirt like they had before, he actually sends an army to fight them. And we'll continue, verse 21 through 27. Then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his men into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. Israel took over all the land of the Amorites who lived in that country, capturing all of it from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the desert to the Jordan. Now, since the Lord, the God of Israel, has driven the Amorites out before his people of Israel, what right have you to take it over? Will you not take what your god Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess. Are you better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever quarrel with Israel or fight with them? For 300 years Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, and the surrounding settlements and all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you retake them during that time? I have not wronged you, but you are doing me wrong by waging war against me. Let the Lord, the judge, decide the dispute this day between the Israelites and the Ammonites. Stop there a moment. Okay, so let's see if I can get a close-up. Yeah, let's still use this one. Okay, so the Sihon, the Amorite, battles with Israel and loses this land here, and then later Og comes and helps out. It's not in here, but if you look in Numbers and Deuteronomy, you'll see it. And Og, the king of this northern part of Amorites, loses part of his land to it. So it actually ends up looking like this, where most of this is all that's left that the Israelites don't take over here, and this part here is what's left of of all the Amorite land. All of this Amorite land was taken over by Israel because of the Amorite kings being bullies and coming and attacking the Israelites. So God was with the Israelites and they got it. And actually that's when, because this part was not part of the original promised land, but when these kings fought against God's people, then it became part of their land. And that's when Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh tribes asked, can we just stay on this side? We'll cross and help you take over the promised land, but we'd rather just stay on this side of the Jordan in Gilead. And so that's how you end up with Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh east opposed to Manasseh west. They're on that side of the Jordan. Okay, so and what they took was from the Arnon to the Jabbok in this original, so this whole pink area here is what they took at the end, what they had won at the end of this battle. And so, Jephthah says, look, we want it from battling the Amorites, not the Ammonites, but the Amorites, because the Amorites were the ones holding that land at the time. But if you look closely, you can see how Ammon has the same borders as this pink area of Amorites. So obviously in the past, before Israel even got out of Egypt, Amorites had come down and taken over this section from the Ammonites. And now the Ammonites are saying, we want this land back. And Jephthah is saying, we didn't take it from you. The Amorites took it from you. If you have a problem, deal with the Amorites. But this is our land. And this next section it is the, let's see. Oh yeah, no, and he also said, we've been here for 300 years. We've been living in this land for 300 years. Now, think of it. Our country, the United States, is not even 300 years old. Yet, the Israelites had been living there for 300 years, and all of a sudden, the Ammonites are saying, we want this land because it was ours. And it's the Israelites are going, it might have been yours, but it was not yours when we got it. It was the Amorite land when we got it. So it's, it's not our fault that you lost it. Maybe you need to just be happy with what your God, Shemosh, has given you, and just let's leave it at that, and what our God has given us. Verse 28. This is a lot of reading. The king of Ammon, however, paid no attention to the message Jephthah sent him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Okay, so the king of Ammon, he doesn't care about the history. He doesn't care if it's right or true. He just wants that land, and he thinks he can get it. And so he attacks. And Jephthah, it starts off, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he starts traveling down through Gilead, the Manasseh Gilead, get to Mizpah, which is down here, and starts battling the Ammonites. Okay? So this is, but then he makes this oath, this vow, that if you're with us, God, if, it's like, if I return in triumph from the Ammonites, I will, whatever comes out of my tent's door first, I will sacrifice to you. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Basically thinking, a sheep or goat or chicken, who knows what's going to come out of it. So anyway, so he makes this promise, this vow to God. We need to be careful. Making a vow is really unnecessary. Something like that where you don't know what you're really vowing. A wedding vow, you are vowing to create a marriage between a husband and wife, and this is a sacred vow. Well, he has just made a sacred vow for whatever comes out of the door by 10 when I get home, my house, whatever comes out first, I will sacrifice to the Lord if he gives me, triumph over the Ammonites. This is not a good vow. This is not a right vow. Don't find yourself tempted in saying, okay, Lord, if you help me do this or win this or get this or, whatever, I will vow to do this for you. And if I can get this job, I will tithe you, this much money. It's like, if I can get this, whatever. It's like, this is not what God is looking for. In fact, the Bible tells us that our reputation should be that our word is our word. That we don't have to vow, that we don't have to, make a, write it and sign it and, okay, we're going to do. It's like, I want to do God's will. I don't need to make it part of a vow and say, well, if you do this, I'll live like this. If you do this, I won't do this. It's like, no, this is not what God's looking for. Remember this. This is a bad vow. It's without thinking. It is off the cuff. And ends up costing a lot. Verse 32. Sorry, I have it sectioned off in the section 9 of my talking. Verse 32 and 33. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. Okay, there I got a close-up of this section. Now, keep in mind the area that they're battling for, the area that had been way back when, at some point in history, Ammonite land that the Amorites had taken over and that were disputed right now. This is from this section here. This is Reuben's land or whatever. But if you go from here and you go up here is the other river, the Jabbok River. That was the northern part of the disputed area. But the cities that are just named in this area here started off in Aroer, whatever, here. And then it kind of goes through all these border cities up until you get to Minnith and as far as Abel Keramim. So it's kind of like there's these cities all along the border that either originally Israelite and had been taken over by the Ammonites during these 18 years or whatever, or they had always been Ammonite. They're right on the border. You can't tell just by looking at them. And but apparently there were 20 cities. There's not so many named here, but from here to here and here, we do know that that is the route he took. That is the route he took to beat the Ammonites. And he did. Verses 34 and 35. When Japheth returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "O my daughter, you have made me miserable and wretched, because I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." Again, obviously this was a stupid vow he had made. He had made this vow. Did you not think a human was going to come out? Did you not think your daughter would be running to come and meet you when you got back from battle, safe and alive? It's like he made this vow without thinking it through. We need to be careful to think things through. Take God seriously and not be flippant with, "Oh yes, I promise to do this. If you do this, God, I'll do this." It's like, no, this is not how God works. And at this point, instead of saying, "Because I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break," he should have said, "I need to go and ask forgiveness from God for having made this vow and ask him to release me of it." But no, he's going to keep it. And his daughter, verses 36 through 38, this is his daughter. "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and the girls went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. Now, because of the careful wording of those verses, in centuries past, they literally took him literally, that he was going to kill her and sacrifice her, which God would have abhorred. It would have been everything against what God is about. Once you start really studying this and the wording of it, the careful wording of it, she didn't. What does she ask for? "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." Not because I am about to die, but I will never marry. And he gives her permission. She goes in the hills to weep because she would never marry. I'm not married, but I'm still alive. Most people now, most commentaries, most Bible in depth, the really smartest people, the ones who have really studied this in the original Hebrew and everything, they correlate it with a custom that was a real thing at this time. And to show you an example of this custom, it reminds me of another story. It reminds me of something that is found in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 11, which says, this is Hannah, who is barren, cannot give birth, and I'm going way over time this time because I didn't use my phone to stop me. And Hannah in verse 11 says, and she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And when we read that, I've heard that story. I've read that story. I've studied that story before. And it was like, oh, okay. It's kind of hard to believe. It's hard to think that, once he was weaned, she brought Samuel to the tabernacle and presented him to the Lord. And he ended up being the last judge, the first a prophet that then anointed the first two kings. He had priestly duties. He did things in the tabernacle, helping out and stuff. And if you read 1 Samuel, you'll get his story. Samuel is the one who they really think wrote down the stories, the book of Judges. And I can just picture him recounting this story and going, she was given to the Lord like I was given to the Lord. For the rest of my life, she would be a maiden who would serve at the tabernacle and serve God for the rest of her life, and she would never marry. She would never have children, and that was a stigma. And Japheth, who had no other children, his lineage would die because there would be no grandchildren. There would be no inheritors. He didn't have to physically kill her, but he was pained for the rest of his life, and she was now offered to God for the rest of her life, and she would never marry. And that makes a whole lot more sense. And the final two verses of Judges is just kind of like, this is a custom to this day. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this comes the Israelite custom that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. And that's the end of the main story. Now there's a little bit more of Jephthah coming up, and an afterthought type thing, an epilogue. We had a prologue. This chapter was the main story, and now we'll have an epilogue. And then also look at 3 more judges all in the next chapter. Chapter 12 is our next chapter. But this chapter has shows us a judge who really didn't seem to take it seriously, making that ridiculous vow. He was flippant. We've got these. Another thing to point out, and we'll find out in the next chapter, that the judge before him had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys and were in charge of 30 cities. The judge after him has 30 sons and 30 daughters. Now, one good thing about Jephthah is he's obviously not a polygamist. He has 1 daughter and no other child that is going to be around. So apparently his wife must have died. She's not around to give him another child. And so it's kind of, the one that he had, he did not appreciate enough. to take this seriously. And that's it for this chapter, and we are 10 minutes past. So this has been a very long story and a very interesting story, though, and a little history lesson there on how they ended up having these the land on the other side of the Jordan where these tribes are living. And if you want to test me and you see me, I can tell you which tribe is in which area. You practice and learn it now. And I'll see you next time with chapter 12. Bye for now.